Numbness can sometimes be a mercy, a blessing I never knew to cherish until it began slipping away. For 3 long hours, trudging through the white, suffocating blur of a New York blizzard felt like being slowly entombed inside a block of freezing concrete. My knees stiffened with every step, the joints grinding together in sharp pain, and the wind didn't just blow. It screamed through the avenues carrying shards of ice that sliced any bit of skin left exposed. People called this the storm of the century, the kind of weather that forced the city that never sleeps into submission. The subway had stopped. Buses lay buried under thick snow. Even ambulance sirens had gone silent beneath drifts piled against the doors of entire buildings. For most people, it was an inconvenience, an excuse to stay indoors with hot chocolate and a movie. But for me, Ava Carter, once an investigative journalist at a major newspaper and now a woman with exactly $3 and a granola bar frozen as hard as stone, this was a death sentence. I stumbled, shoulder hitting the brick wall of an alley just to keep from collapsing into the waist-high snow. One fall I knew, and I wouldn't get back up. My eyes burned from the wind breath slicing my throat every time I tried to draw in another strand of that razor-cold air. The city that was usually loud enough to drown itself out had gone eerily quiet, as if every sound had been swallowed by the thick white blanket sealing over every surface. My feet were so numb I could no longer feel my toes, only the drag of my own weight sinking deeper into the soft, treacherous snow each time I tried to lift a foot. The old backpack on my shoulders was nearly empty, holding nothing but a USB drive containing the evidence that had an entire organization hunting me, and that useless granola bar I wasn't even sure I could still eat. I pulled my thin coat tighter, the damp fabric clinging to my skin and making me shiver uncontrollably. A taxi sat stranded in the middle of the street windows, frosted over lights blinking weakly, but I knew there would be no one inside to call for help. Apartment windows on both sides were sealed shut, curtains drawn warm amber light behind thick glass, looking like another world, a world I once belonged to, before everything fell apart. A piercing chill shot down my spine and my knees buckled. I braced myself against the wall, fighting to stay upright, feeling the last scrap of warmth inside me, draining away with each lash of wind across my face. I had been running for 3 days since they realized I hadn't died in that accidental car crash. The Balkans didn't make the same mistake twice. They wanted me erased from the map forever. My heart clenched when a sharp metallic sound rang out at the end of the alley. Something small, but unmistakably real. I turned breath, blooming into a pale cloud before me, trying to see through the snow. Nothing. But instinct made me step back, once then twice. I knew the signs of a hunt better than anyone, and I knew my time was almost up. If I didn't find somewhere warm enough to thaw the paralysis creeping through my legs, I would die here a quiet death in the most crowded city in America where no one would ever know I existed. I tightened my grip on my backpack, lifted my chin, and pushed forward into the storm, swallowing everything whole. And if you're still listening now and something in this story has touched a corner of your own life, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories every day. And, if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which little corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every message you share. I stepped out of the alley as the wind whipped so violently it felt ready to tear me apart. My vision was reduced to a dense sheet of white streetlights swallowed whole before they could cast even a dim halo. My mind spun. I had no idea where I was headed, only that I had to keep moving if I wanted to live. When I turned onto a narrower street where rows of parked cars lay entirely buried under snow, I saw it, a black Cadillac Escalade, its massive frame dusted with frost, a thin sheen of condensation on the windshield, and most importantly, a faint warmth seeping from the edges of the door. A running engine in this weather meant the owner had stepped away only briefly or was still somewhere nearby. Under normal circumstances, I would have kept my distance, but the cold, turning my blood to ice, made morality feel like a luxury I could no longer afford. I glanced around. No one in sight for dozens of yards. The wind howled so wildly, even footsteps were swallowed whole. I reached into my coat pocket for the thin metal shim, the one thing I'd kept from my days as a reporter when I sometimes needed to slip into old storage units for files. My fingers were numb, nearly useless, but muscle memory carried me. I slid the shim into the lock, twisted. 3 seconds. A soft click broke through the storm like a lifeline. I opened the door, climbed into the back seat, and slammed it shut before the wind could drag me back out. Warm air drifted from the vents, faint but fierce enough to make my lungs burn as if I'd inhaled fire. The scent of real leather, a trace of gunpowder, and the sharp cold still clinging to the front seats hit me at once. I curled into a corner, pulling my thin coat tight, shaking so hard my teeth ached. Slowly, my body began to remember what life felt like. I closed my eyes for one steadying breath, listening for any sound outside. Only the wind scraping against metal, the long groaning hush of a city turning to ice. Maybe the owner was nearby. Maybe they'd return and find me, but I had no other choice. If I hadn't climbed in the snow outside, would have swallowed me before dawn. I cupped my hands around my mouth, blowing warm air onto fingers that were turning a deep shade of purple. Pain flared as blood returned, pain that signaled life, not death. Outside, despite the limited visibility, I sensed movement, a shadow gliding past the hood, then vanishing. I sat upright, heart hammering. Nothing. Was it the storm playing tricks on me? Or had the Balkans tracked me to this very street? My chest tightened. They never gave up. The evidence I carried didn't just endanger me with Balkan Mafia, it implicated men with federal badges. They would not allow me to live. The warmth inside the SUV blurred my awareness, not with comfort, but with exhaustion. I leaned back, drew a long breath, fighting to stay conscious. Just a few minutes. I needed only a few minutes to keep from freezing to death. But the moment my eyes drifted shut, a sound sliced through the wind like a knife, footsteps heavy and certain crunching toward the vehicle. Not the wind, not imagination. Someone was approaching. And I had never felt so breakable in my life. The door yanked open with enough force for the cold to rush in and coil around me like a predator. I jolted up, spine pressed to the seat, and my gaze collided with the figure filling the doorway. Tall, broad, almost blocking the whole frame. Streetlight glinted off the snow, dusting the shoulders of his long black coat. The edges of his face honed sharp as carved stone, and his eyes dark, calm, dangerously unreadable. Damien Leone. I recognized him instantly, not because I had met him, but because anyone who lived long enough in New York had heard his name whispered as warning, threat, or prayer. Head of the Leone family, the ghost king no one saw unless he wished to be seen. The man whose name alone could drain the color from the faces of armed men. And I was alone, trembling, hiding in his SUV like a cornered animal. His gaze drifted over me, slow and calculating, then stopped on the shim lying on the seat beside my hand. His fingers tightened on the doorframe, knuckles turning white. "What did you just do to my car?" His voice was low and even, not loud, but cold enough to drop the temperature inside the vehicle by another degree. My throat was too raw to form words. Only a breath slipped out. I swallowed hard, forcing sound. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was freezing out there. I needed warmth just for a moment. Damien tilted his head, clearly unconvinced. His eyes were so sharp I felt stripped to the bone. He reached in, lifted the shim with 2 fingers, turning it lightly, as if examining evidence. "You know how to open a locked car with this. Not a question, a verdict." I raised both hands instinctively, palms forward, as if that might make me appear less threatening. "I'm a reporter. I used to be. Sometimes I had to slip into old storage buildings for documents. I'm not a criminal, I didn't finish." His expression didn't change, but his gaze grew a shade colder. He was weighing me, who I was, what I wanted, why I dared touch what belonged to him. I knew men like him. They didn't spare you out of kindness. They let you live only if you were useful. And I had nothing useful to offer, not with a shaking body and an empty backpack. Get out. His voice was quiet, but it was not a suggestion. It was an order. My stomach nodded. Getting out meant walking back into death. Please, I'm begging you. The words barely left my mouth before his hand dropped to his waist, fingers resting on the grip of a gun beneath his coat. One small movement enough to send my legs weak. Last time. Get out. I inhaled a sharp breath, summoning the final scraps of courage, bracing myself to crawl back into the storm, even though I knew I wouldn't make it far. I had only moved a few inches when a sharp crack split through the night, a gunshot tearing straight through the blizzard. Then another. Damien snapped his head toward the street, fingers tightening on his gun by pure instinct. I wasn't from his world, but I knew the sound. Those weren't warning shots. Those were hunting shots. And only one group was hunting me tonight. Damien looked at me again, his eyes darkening with a realization I'd been running from for days. Someone out there was willing to kill me in the middle of a blizzard. A figure emerged from the white haze. Then two more behind him, moving in formation, each step deliberate, guns raised. Damien gripped the doorframe blocking the entrance, but his gaze stayed fixed on the approaching silhouettes. And I saw it, the flicker of a decision passing across his face in a single breath. Leave me. Or drag me into a fight that wasn't his. I held my breath. 1 second. Then 2. By the third, Damien reached inside, seized my wrist, yanked me down to the floor of the SUV and barked, head down. And the moment I threw myself to the carpet, the first volley of bullets sliced through the air toward us. The sound of shattering glass exploded the moment the first bullets tore through the rear door, burying themselves into the leather seat beside my ear. Damien didn't wait for another signal. He lunged forward, one hand pressing my shoulder firmly to the floor, while the other drew his gun and fired back through the still open gap of the door. 3 deep, measured, terrifyingly precise shots cracked through the roar of wind and the shriek of the blizzard hammering against the SUV. I heard someone collapse into the snow, followed by the muffled shouts of the 2 Balkan men still hidden in the thick white curtain. Damien twisted around, hauled me up from the floor, and practically threw me into the front seat. Seat belt. He didn't shout yet. His voice was so sharp and low it jolted my heart. He rounded the hood, slipping once on the thick snow, but never losing balance, and slid into the driver's seat in less than 2 breaths. The moment his door slammed shut, he slammed his foot on the accelerator so hard my back hit the seat. The Escalade surged forward like a wounded beast, snapped into fury, its wheels spinning over the snow and flinging sheets of white across the windshield. Behind us, bullets kept whistling through the storm, hammering against the armored frame with a furious, relentless rhythm. I flinched at the metallic whine bending under the force of each hit, knowing that if the SUV weren't secretly reinforced, I would already be dead. Damien angled the mirror, his eyes narrowing as 2 Balkan silhouettes burst out of the storm with their weapons raised. He lowered the driver's window just a sliver and fired twice without lingering to aim. One man dropped instantly, the second diving behind a trash bin, nearly blown sideways by the wind. Damien raised the window and flicked a glance at me. "How many are hunting you?" I forced air back into my lungs. I'm not sure. 8, 10 more. He shot me a look that was equal parts disbelief and irritation. Perfect. He hit the gas again, sliding the SUV through a narrow turn between 2 brownstones. Perfect. My voice cracked with cold and panic. Yeah, because now they're hunting me too. My stomach tightened when I spotted a dark figure at the intersection ahead. Turn left. If you go straight, they'll ambush you at the next crossing. Damien cut his eyes toward me. Fast. Brief. But something shifted in that single heartbeat. Trust. Or at least recalculation. He spun the wheel so hard the SUV tilted, and I clung to the armrest to avoid smashing my head against the window. The narrow street we entered was buried under snow, but blessedly empty of gunmen. Damien shifted gears, the tires grinding through packed ice. You're clearly not just some homeless girl. I didn't answer. I didn't have the breath for it. And because the truth felt like a blade turning over secrets I had buried so deep. But silence was more dangerous than honesty. There's a traffic camera ahead, I forced out. If you drive past it, the Balkans will track the direction we're heading. Damien let out a low sound of annoyance. You know more than you should. I'll explain later, I whispered, pointing to an even narrower turn, nearly hidden by a stalled pickup truck. No cameras there. Turn. He obeyed without hesitation this time. The new street was so narrow, the SUV barely fit the windows, brushing past darkened brownstone walls with their windows shuttered against the storm. Wind screamed through the cracks like the city itself was crying out. The headlights pierced only a few feet ahead before disappearing into the swirling white abyss. A minor mistake would send the SUV crashing into a brick wall or plowing into a snowbank taller than a grown man. Damien drove fast, yet his control was flawless, every shift and turn executed with a brutal, disciplined precision. Then I noticed the faint red blink of a traffic camera behind us slowly being smothered by falling snow. An idea flashed in my mind. Turn off the headlights. I said it quickly. Damien turned his head, frowning. In a blizzard, if not, they'll follow the beam cutting through the snow. Trust me. A tense shadow twitched along his jawline, but then his hand moved. The headlights died instantly, plunging us into a darkness so thick it felt like ink. Only the wind, the crunch of tires through snow, and the frantic pounding of my heart remained. And strangely, Damien didn't curse or argue. He drove on no headlights, navigating by the faint dying glow of the streetlights behind us, blurred by the storm. He trusted me, at least partly. And for a man like Damien, partly was monumental. Who are you really? He asked, his voice low, metallic, like steel grinding against stone. I stared ahead at the snow falling so heavily it felt like the sky itself was dissolving. Someone who, if you don't listen to, will get both of us killed tonight. Damien didn't reply. But I saw the subtle pull at the corner of his mouth, a hint of a smile impossible to read. Half challenge, half acknowledgement. And as the SUV skimmed past a fallen tree and dodged what could have been another ambush, I knew he no longer saw me as a trembling intruder. He saw me as part of the war he had just chosen to enter. My breath came fast and shallow as the Escalade slid through another snow-choked stretch, the rear fishtailing before Damien corrected it with hands as steady as iron. He didn't speak for several minutes, focused only on the invisible road, but tension radiated from him like heat from a coiled spring, as if he had let a dangerous stranger into his vehicle, and had no idea yet what kind of threat he was holding on to. Finally, when he steered into a narrow alley far from the main streets, Damien slowed down, his dark eyes sweeping across the silent brick buildings before landing on me. Continue, he said, voice low and sharp as a blade. Why do the Balkans want you dead this badly? And how did they know about the basement of the warehouse where my meeting was tonight? I swallowed the burn scraping down my throat, because I know the thing they fear most. Damien didn't look surprised, but his gaze deepened, sharpened. What is it? I reached into my thin, half-soaked backpack and pulled from a hidden pocket a small silver USB drive and a notebook whose edges were damp from melted snow. I set them onto the cup holder between us. Proof of who's selling information about the Leone family to the Balkans. The air in the SUV seemed to thicken. Damien turned fully toward me, his stare so cold it sent a shiver crawling down my spine. You're playing a very dangerous game. I know. I gripped my hands together to steady their trembling born from cold and a fear I didn't dare name with him watching me. But I don't have a choice. Damien glanced at the USB, then back at me. You just said, the Leone family. His voice was slow-edged, unforgiving. Do you understand who you're accusing? I'm not accusing, I replied. My eyes locked on his. I'm carrying the truth. Damien turned back toward the windshield, though he didn't hit the gas again. The SUV idled in place, warm air from the vents slowly seeping into my frozen skin. "Keep talking," he said, quieter, but still lined with dangerous skepticism. I opened the notebook pages covered in tight handwriting and symbols. I used to be an investigative journalist. I followed the money. Then the money led to the leaks. And the leaks led me to the Balkans. A month ago, I discovered they were buying information from an insider in your organization. Damien narrowed his eyes. "My organization doesn't have insiders." "Then who's sending them your meeting locations?" I handed him a page showing a decoded message. "This message was sent 3 days before your meeting tonight. All they had to do was set up an ambush. They didn't need to track you." Damien took the notebook from my hand. His fingers were cold and strong enough to make me involuntarily shiver. He flipped through several pages, his gaze halting on a line I had rewritten from a sequence of numbers, turning it into a sentence. 3 in the morning. Warehouse number 8. Back door unlocked. No guards. The exact location where I had seen him earlier tonight before the Balkans opened fire on the street he had just turned off. "How did you get these?" "From a pattern of matching transactions between a shell account and the payment channel used for the Balkans. I just followed the trail and matched it with the encrypted messages." "Encrypted how?" "Using alternating characters based on the Fibonacci sequence. Every third real letter was mixed with a false one, creating a contrast string." I separated and reconstructed the order to reveal the message. Damien stared at me as if reassessing every part of who he thought I was in the span of a few seconds. Gone was the irritation or the threat. In its place was a sharp silence of a man who had realized the stranger beside him was far more dangerous than he first imagined. A homeless girl who can decode Fibonacci. He emphasized every word, suspicion wrapped around each one. I met his gaze without looking away. A homeless girl who once took down 3 senators and shut down 2 corporations. I am not ordinary. I'm just on the run. Damien watched me for several breaths, his dark eyes shadowed by something no longer hostile, something calculating, observing, weighing whether to keep me alive or silence me where I sat. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "this insider didn't just betray me. He betrayed the entire Leone family." "I know," I whispered. "And I know who he is." The air inside the SUV thickened like the ice over the Hudson River. Damien didn't blink. "Tell me." I inhaled deeply, fingers tightening around the edge of my damp coat. "He's someone very close to you. So close you would never believe he's capable of a betrayal. And if we don't stop him now, tonight will only be the beginning of a massacre." Damien looked at me as if trying to see through every secret I carried, and in that moment, I felt the shift, not just in his intentions, but in the entire trajectory of the night. He no longer saw me as an intruder. He now saw me as a threat and a potential ally. The wind screamed in long, slicing currents as Damien steered the SUV out of the alley and onto a main road so drowned in snow it was impossible to tell where the lanes ended and the sidewalks began. He said nothing, didn't look at me, but I felt the shift in him like a predator, transitioning from defense to attack. He had heard me, but he did not fully believe me. That was the instinct of a Mafia king who had survived too many betrayals to ever place his life in the hands of someone he barely knew. When the Escalade merged into a wider intersection, Damien pulled his phone from his coat pocket, scanning a few alerts before speaking in a voice low and razor-sharp. "The meeting is still on." My stomach dropped. "You can't go. I don't have a choice. 3 families are waiting. Any absence from me right now will be taken as weakness, or worse, an admission that I've been attacked." But that's exactly the trap. My voice broke into white fog in the confined air. "Do you remember the encrypted message gave the Balkans the exact time and place before you even received the official details? Think, Damien, where did that leak come from?" His only answer was a violent yank of the wheel that forced me to grip the door to stay upright. "I'll be careful." Damien, being careful means nothing when you're walking straight into the place they want you dead. My frustration cracked into something close to a shout. Why do you think the Balkans chased you tonight? Just for me? No. They want to make sure you never show up to that meeting. Damien's eyes flicked toward me, black and cold, but something inside them wavered. I still have to go. Then at least. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, as I prepared to say something I knew he would hate. At least let me go in with you. Damien actually laughed, a low, sharp sound, edged with mockery and danger. You walk into a Mafia summit in the middle of a blizzard with 3 families who would tear apart any stranger on sight. If I don't go, you'll die. My voice was so steady it frightened even me. The SUV fell into a sudden hush, as if the storm itself paused to listen. A moment later, Damien spoke again, his tone low enough to chill my spine. You're overestimating yourself, Ava. No, I replied without blinking. I'm underestimating the trap they've prepared for you. The SUV pushed through the dim, snowy streets with nothing but scattered lamplight and the heat of our breath filling the space. The argument had ended. Damien didn't agree, but he didn't reject it either. And I knew what that meant he was thinking. We reached our destination near the end of the night when the storm had softened, but the snow still fell in heavy curtain-like sheets. The building hosting the meeting sat on the edge of Brooklyn, an abandoned warehouse converted into an underground conference room. The exterior lights were on, but inside, darkness. No guards, no voices, no movement, only silence, the kind of silence that belongs to death. My skin crawled. Damien killed the engine and opened his door. I lurched forward, grabbing his arm. Damien, don't go in. He turned, eyes darkening. Let go. No. I tightened my hold. Look around you. A Mafia meeting is never this quiet. No guards, no soldiers, no cars. This isn't a meeting. This is a battlefield. He didn't shove me off. He only looked at me as if trying to decide whether I was afraid for him or afraid for myself. Ava, he said slowly, I can control any situation, except the one where the traitor is inside your own house. His eyes froze for a heartbeat, one single crack in that impenetrable confidence. But within a breath, Damien was Damien again, cold, unshaken, unbreakable. He brushed off my hand and stepped into the snow. I rushed after him, grabbing his coat once more. Damien, don't! I didn't finish. A faint click sounded on the warehouse roof, the exact kind of sound I had heard in war zones when someone stepped on a pressure trigger or brushed a tripwire. Damien heard it too. He stopped dead. Then came a short, sharp beep from inside the warehouse. I only had time to shove him with all my strength. In the next instant, the ground erupted. A burst of white light slashed sideways across my vision, followed by the screech of metal collapsing walls and snow exploding into fragments around us. Damien fell across me, shielding my body entirely, as debris rained down. My ears roared. Smoke, gunpowder, and the metallic scent of the blizzard fused into a suffocating cloud. And when I opened my eyes, there was only one truth left: the trap had detonated. And Damien had stepped right into the center of it. The blast hadn't even cleared when gunfire erupted from every direction, ricocheting off the twisted steel of the warehouse remains. I dragged Damien up despite my ringing ears, snow mixed with ash, thickening the air, until breathing felt like swallowing knives. Figures stormed in from all sides, Balkan men with automatic rifles sweeping deadly arcs into the space where they assumed Damien would be standing. Damien steadied himself, just long enough to pull his gun, firing back without hesitation, each bullet slicing the frozen air with lethal accuracy. But there were too many of them, and the explosion had sealed every possible escape. I yanked him behind an overturned slab of concrete, cold sweat breaking across my spine, as I realized the Balkan plan wasn't just to ambush. They wanted to erase the entire room, leave no survivors, no witnesses, no story to tell. Damien clenched his teeth, eyes dark with fury, as he scanned the battlefield. They knew the exact meeting location, the way they positioned their men. This wasn't random. Because your traitor told them, I said, never taking my eyes off the distant movement. Damien opened his mouth to argue, when the roar of an engine cut through the gunfire. A black sedan screeched to a halt at the edge of the alley just outside the kill zone. The driver's door flew open. Damien, get in. I'll get you out. It was Lucas, Damien's younger brother. He was frantic, waving his arms, signaling for Damien to break cover and run toward the car. They've surrounded the block. Run to me now. Damien exhaled relief, flashing across his face as he prepared to sprint toward his brother. But I grabbed his arm, digging my nails into his coat. Don't move. Ava, that's Lucas. He's here to save us. Look closer, Damien, I shouted over the wind. Look at the bullets. Damien froze. It was a detail only someone who had survived war zones would notice. The Balkan shooters were pouring heavy fire onto our position behind the concrete slab, pinning us down. But Lucas's car, sitting exposed in the middle of the street, a massive easy target, was untouched. Not a single bullet hit his windshield. Not a single shot was fired his way. The enemy wasn't missing him. They were avoiding him. Why aren't they shooting at him? I whispered, my voice trembling with the cold realization. He's creating a funnel. He wants you to run into the open so their snipers can finish you. No, Damien breathed, shaking his head. He wouldn't. Damien, hurry. Lucas screamed again, his voice cracking. He stretched his hand out and his coat sleeve rode up. That was when Damien saw it. A faint red circular indentation on Lucas's wrist. The skin was irritated and pale where a strap had been tight against it for hours. It was the exact mark of a remote detonator trigger recently removed. Lucas noticed Damien staring at his wrist. He flinched, quickly pulling his sleeve down, but the look in his eyes changed instantly. The panic of a concerned brother vanished, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a man whose plan had just failed. Lucas, Damien said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the freezing air. You knew. Lucas swallowed his hand, drifting toward the gear shift to flee. I don't know what you're talking about. You led me into a trap. Damien raised his gun, aiming not at the enemy, but at the sedan. Lucas panicked. He slammed the car into reverse, abandoning the rescue act entirely. But before he could escape, a tiny metallic tick sounded beneath the rubble near my feet. Damien, move! I lunged, shoving him aside at the exact second the ground shuddered. The second explosive detonated with a deafening roar, unleashing a shockwave that hurled snow and debris against my back and threw both of us violently against the twisted side of a shipping container. My ears rang again, but I still managed to turn my head and look at Lucas. He was untouched, not thrown, not hit by debris, standing exactly 3 safe paces away as if he knew precisely where the second blast would hit. And this time Damien saw it clearer than I did. His face flooded with shock pain, then hardened into something lethal. Lucas, Damien said, voice so low it was nearly a growl. You knew. Lucas swallowed. I don't know what you're talking about. You led me into a trap. Damien rose to his feet despite the blood dripping at his temple. You knew. And you let me walk in. Lucas's face drained of color, but before he could speak again, Balkan soldiers and their hired guns emerged from behind him, stepping forward with weapons raised, and Lucas stepped back toward them. I saw it clearly. Damien saw it clearly. The truth could no longer hide. The traitor wasn't a guard, wasn't a meeting organizer, wasn't a soldier. It was Damien Leone's only brother. And now we were completely surrounded. There was only one chance left to survive escape before the warehouse collapsed entirely. And I knew Damien would never abandon Lucas, even now, even with the betrayal laid bare. Because family in his world was always the sharpest knife, and the one holding it was always the person he once loved most. Damien reacted with a speed that barely seemed human after the second explosion, as if his body had been engineered for one purpose, only to survive chaos. He seized Lucas by the collar, yanked him out of the line of fire where the Balkans were advancing, twisted him around, wrenched his arm behind his back, and forced his head down into the frozen ground while pressing the barrel of his gun to his temple. Lucas screamed a mix of fear and pain, but Damien gave him no space to resist. I rushed forward too, snatching up a fallen gun and firing several covering shots to keep anyone from daring to move closer. The ruined warehouse behind us flickered with angry red flames through the blizzard, casting a hellish glow across Lucas's pale face, as if illuminating every sin he had committed. Damien dragged him up, hauled him across the snow toward the SUV, still standing in the far corner, shoved aside the packed drifts, wrenched the rear door open, and threw Lucas inside like a sack of grain. Lucas' begged voice, shaking wildly, "Damien, I just wanted to live. The Balkans forced me if I didn't." Damien slammed the door shut before he could finish, as if even a single extra word might make him pull the trigger. I slid into the passenger seat, my heart hammering, as Damien started the engine and floored the accelerator. The SUV lurched, wheels spinning, trying to claw their way out of the ice. Gunfire cracked behind us, the Balkans and their men charging like a pack of beasts smelling blood. Damien hissed, "Hold on!" I barely had time to grip the seat before the SUV jerked forward, surged an inch, then was swallowed whole by the snowdrift. The wheels spun uselessly, trapped in the frozen mire. Damien clenched his jaw and fought the steering wheel. Nothing. A violent gust hit the SUV, shaking the steel frame like a struck bell. The ice beneath us had hardened into a thick crust, locking the tires in place. Lucas began pounding the back door. "Please, they're coming. Don't leave me here." Damien didn't turn. "Shut up." His voice was so cold, I felt the temperature in the cabin drop lower than the storm outside. The Balkans were closing in. There was no choice left but to abandon the vehicle. Damien unbuckled his seatbelt and issued a command. "On foot. Into the woods. They won't chase far." I opened the door, the wind slashing across my face like a blade of glass. I staggered, and Damien pulled me tight against him to shield me from the worst of the gale. He opened the rear door, grabbed Lucas by the collar, and dragged him out. Lucas collapsed into snow up to his knees. "Damien, please don't leave me." "They forced me, I swear." Damien tightened his grip on Lucas's collar until the younger man could barely breathe. "You betrayed your own family." "I didn't want to. I had no choice." Damien shoved him forward. His voice was low, cold, carved from stone. "Now you have one. Walk or die here." Lucas's face drained of color, but he stumbled after us. We left the SUV behind, crossing a landscape littered with twisted metal and shattered wood from the warehouse explosion, then plunged into the blinding white forest stretching behind the industrial block. Trees groaned beneath the weight of snow. The wind screamed through the trunks like the furious voice of nature itself. Damien walked ahead, shielding me from the wind gusts that struck hard enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Lucas stumbled behind, crying as he went. "Damien, don't let them take me. I'll tell you everything." Damien didn't answer. He only looked back once, and in that glance there was no mercy, no softness, only the cold appraisal of a man who had decided not to kill, but not to forgive. "You don't get to demand anything," he said. "I'm keeping you alive for one reason only, to learn who in the Leone family took money to protect you. No one. It was just me. Don't lie before I bury you here." His tone was quiet as breath, but I saw Lucas's entire body shudder. Gunfire echoed from far behind us. The Balkans had found the SUV. They knew which direction we had gone. We had to move faster. Damien steered us into a narrow path between two ancient trees. The snow sank deep beneath every step, threatening to swallow our legs. My lungs burned with every breath, each inhalation feeling like inhaling shards of ice. Lucas fell once, twice, a third time. Each time he begged Damien to slow down. Each time Damien ignored him, yanking him upright only hard enough to keep him from dying in the snow, then marching on. In the forest, the darkness thickened as the blizzard swallowed what little light remained. But Damien walked as if he had traveled this path 100 times before every decision quick and precise, and in that moment I understood why he had survived so long in the Mafia world, because he never allowed emotion to guide him. Lucas was the opposite. He sobbed openly when a violent gust ripped snow off a branch, dumping it over him like a burial shroud. Damien, I don't want to die. Damien turned for the first time during the escape and looked his brother full in the face. You won't die. Not tonight. But if you lie to me again, I'll end it myself. Lucas choked on his breath and fell silent. The gunfire behind us faded, the pursuit more distant now. We had gone deep enough to slip out of their line of sight, but the storm was growing stronger, threatening to knock us to our knees. Before I even saw the faint glow through the swirling white, I already knew we had escaped one death only to walk straight into another unless we found shelter. And Damien's fingers still clamped around Lucas's wrist, not once glancing behind us, spoke a single sentence that told me the escape had only just begun. Keep moving. The Leone ancestral cabin isn't far. Pushing deeper through the frozen woods, we finally saw it. A small cabin hunched beneath layers of snow, its wooden roof sagging, its dark walls worn by time, no smoke rising from its weathered chimney. It looked more like a grave than a sanctuary. But in a storm that sounded ready to rip the forest apart, it was the only hope we had. Damien practically dragged Lucas while I struggled to keep my balance against the wind slashing across the clearing. At the door, Damien slammed his shoulder into the rusted lock. It gave way with a groan like dying timber. Cold but mercifully windless air wrapped around us as we stepped inside. Damien shoved Lucas forward and slammed the door so hard, dust sifted down from the beams. The cabin was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the storm bleeding through cracked window glass. The wooden floorboards moaned under our steps. Damien moved to an old cabinet, pulled out a few dry logs, and dropped them into the fireplace. I found a box of matches on a shelf and struck one. The flame quivered, small, but alive. Damien crouched to light the fire, his hands trembling slightly from the cold, though every movement remained controlled, deliberate. When the flames finally rose, warm light filled the room, and that was when I saw the blood seeping through his sleeve, dark against the black coat. My breath caught and I rushed to him. You're badly hurt. Damien glanced down as though only now noticing. I'll live. You're losing blood. If we don't treat it, you'll lose heat too. He tilted his head slightly, studying me as if my concern were suspicious, but he didn't refuse. I knelt beside him, pulled my soaked backpack close, and took out the small medical kit I had carried since my days covering war zones. Only a few things: needle and thread, alcohol gauze, a wrapped razor blade. I rolled up Damien's sleeve, revealing a long, deep gash torn open, as if ripped by jagged metal. Lucas huddled in the corner, hands clasped, staring at his brother in terrified silence. Do you need me to shut up? Damien said, without looking his way, and Lucas fell silent instantly. I took a long breath, steadying my hands. I have to stitch this. It will hurt. Damien met my eyes, and for a moment the boundary between us felt like it dissolved. Do it. I poured alcohol onto the wound. Damien clenched his jaw but didn't flinch. I stitched him carefully, each loop tight and precise, the way I had patched up reckless photographers in Middle Eastern battlefields. Each time the needle pierced his skin, his muscles twitched, but his gaze never wavered from mine. He wasn't afraid of pain. It was something else, a quiet study of me, as if he were evaluating the truth of every breath I took. Outside, the storm howled with rising fury, but inside the cabin, only the crackle of burning wood filled the silence. Lucas sat curled up, not daring to move. I wrapped the bandage around Damien's arm, my hands warming near the fire, absorbing both the heat and the radiating presence of the man beside me. When I finished, I exhaled shakily. Damien was still watching me, his silence deep enough that I heard my own heartbeat. Where did you learn to stitch the field? People don't always make it to hospitals. You were a journalist. Yet you know more than most soldiers. When you follow a special ops unit to the Syrian border to interview a witness being hunted, you learn how to save yourself. Damien leaned back against the wooden wall, the firelight carving shadows across his face. Not cold now, but heavy with something older, deeper. You've seen a lot of people die. Too many. Yet you ran toward the warehouse when you heard the blast. That's not what someone afraid of dying does. I paused, tightening the remaining gauze between my fingers. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying before I get to tell the truth. Damien was silent a moment, then unexpectedly slipped his injured hand out of the bandage and placed it over my wrist. Not forceful, not threatening, but enough for the warmth of his skin to seep into mine. I don't like owing anyone. Tonight, you saved my life twice. The words were soft, barely audible, unless someone sat as close as I did. And in Damien Leone's world, that was not gratitude. It was acknowledgement. A milestone. I looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time saw the weariness beneath his sharp, unyielding gaze. The weariness of a man who had carried too much loss, too much vengeance, and never allowed anyone to touch the fragile places still beating inside him. I finished securing the bandage and lowered his sleeve. You need rest. Damien didn't answer. He only turned his gaze toward Lucas, trembling in the corner. He won't live long if I sleep. I'll keep watch. Damien looked at me again, weighing whether he could hand me his life for even a short while. Outside, the blizzard hammered the cabin walls like a fist of winter death. But inside, in the trembling glow of the fire, Damien Leone, the coldest, sharpest, most ruthless man in New York, let his eyes close for a brief moment, and for the first time allowed himself to lean even slightly on someone outside his world. He leaned on me. The wind slammed against the cabin walls with growing fury as night descended, as if the blizzard itself sensed the Balkans drawing near and had decided to join their side. I could hear branches snapping in the forest, the howl of wind slipping through the cracks in the wood. But beneath all of it, I caught another sound, the heavy, measured tread of footsteps, someone trying to move quietly, yet still leaving faint impressions in the deep snow. Damien opened his eyes the moment I turned my head. It took him only a breath to register what I had heard, and every trace of exhaustion vanished, replaced by pure survival instinct. They're here. I nodded. Lucas shot upright, his voice trembling so violently it barely stayed inside his throat. Damien, please. If they find me, I'm dead. Please let me go or lock me in the cellar. I swear I'll stay quiet, I swear. Damien looked at him with a coldness so sharp, it felt like the entire cabin froze. If you beg one more time, I'll tie you to the door so the Balkans see you first. Lucas shut up instantly, tears burning down his pale, terrified face. Damien rose, his injured arm moving slower but still steady, then looked at me. How many minutes do we have? 5 or 6, depending on the wind. Our tracks are almost gone under the snow, but the cabin flickers with firelight. They'll find us. Damien nodded, once his gaze shifting to the fireplace. Is there gas in here? An old tank in the cellar? Good. From that moment on, we no longer had time to breathe. Damien ripped aside the rug in the corner, revealing an old wooden trapdoor. He hauled up a rusted gas tank from below and set it beside the fireplace, checking the valve quickly, efficiently. It will explode if flame touches it, if we open the valve just enough and build pressure. He nodded again and moved to the door. Wire. I opened my backpack and pulled out the fishing line I had used for makeshift traps when reporting near the border. Damien took it, tested its strength, then stretched it tightly across the entrance just a few inches above the floor, perfect height for a man rushing through the dark to trip. I poured the alcohol-based antiseptic onto strips of cloth and placed them around the fireplace, creating a path for the flames. Damien worked while watching me through the flickering light. You've set traps before, when survival required it. Not typical for a journalist. No one survives the places I used to stand by holding a pen alone. Damien tilted his head, something sharp and unsettling in his eyes, as if he were seeing a version of me I had forgotten existed. From the corner, Lucas curled tighter into himself, arms wrapped around his knees. Damien, I can help. I know how the Balkans move. They'll attack from silence. Damien's voice dropped to a depth that felt like a stone falling into a bottomless well. You've helped enough. No one spoke after that. There was no room for negotiation or hope, only preparation. When the line was set and the chemicals placed, Damien turned to me. Our eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the world outside paused. No storm, no Balkans, only the truth that two people who should never have stood side by side were now shoulder to shoulder waiting for death. Stay behind me, he said softly, not as a command, but almost like an acknowledgement that I was no longer a burden. I stood half a step from him, close enough to hear the deep, steady rhythm of his breath beneath the scream of the wind. The footsteps outside grew clearer. One, then another, then many. They split apart, circling the cabin in a predatory formation. Damien reloaded. I lifted the small gun he had handed me when we fled the warehouse. Only the weak firelight remained. Lucas covered his mouth, terrified he would scream. Damien leaned closer, his voice a breath against my ear. When I say run, you go straight through the back door. Don't look back. I'm not running first. He shot me a glance in the dark, his eyes flashing with something between frustration and respect, as if he wanted to scold me, but couldn't. A heavy thud hit the door. Two Balkan men were closing in. Damien raised his gun. I raised mine. Lucas held his breath so long his skin turned ghost white. The wind shrieked through the roof beams, sparks in the fireplace trembling like nervous omens. Then footsteps charged. The tension before impact felt like a wire tightening around my throat. Damien stood unshaken, the hand on his trigger steady as stone. I knew he could hear the heartbeat of the man on the other side of the door. When the footsteps reached the fishing line, Damien whispered, "Just for me. Now." And the door burst open. The cabin door flew inward at the exact moment gunfire cracked the air apart. The first two Balkan men rushed in and immediately tripped over the line, pitching forward. Damien fired without hesitation, two sharp shots punching through rotting wood and flesh alike, dropping them instantly. But before their bodies even hit the floor, a hail of bullets tore through the walls, splintering the cabin like a massive hailstorm. Wood exploded, shards spinning through the air. The whole structure trembled, as if the storm meant to tear it apart. I rolled aside to avoid flying debris, grabbed the chemical-soaked cloth, and hurled it toward the window. Under the firelight, the fumes ignited into a thick, burning smog that sent the attackers outside coughing violently. Damien seized the moment, lunged toward the door opening, and fired 3 shots through a gap in the shattered boards. 3 choked cries sounded, then silence. Lucas screamed from the corner, voice cracking under terror. "Don't let them take me. Don't let them shoot me. I don't want to die." Damien didn't even glance back. He gripped his gun tighter and shouted over the gunfire, "Ava, back to the fireplace." I understood instantly. That was our explosion point. A wooden shard sliced across my cheek, leaving a hot sting. I shielded my head and sprinted low toward the fireplace, pulling the last bottle of alcohol from my bag. The cabin felt like a dying beast groaning under the assault of bullets, wind, and fire. A massive crash shook the entire room. At least 3 men were slamming into the back door. It cracked open an inch before Damien blew the hinges apart, slamming it shut again, as if a ghostly hand held it in place. But the Balkans didn't stop. They began firing through the walls themselves, bullets punching through the thin wood panels, spraying dust and splinters like white powder. One round grazed Damien's shoulder, forcing him back half a step. I lunged forward and dragged him toward the fireplace to avoid the next volley. "Let me handle it!" I shouted over the roar of the storm and gunfire. Damien's jaw clenched, tendons standing out, his hands locked on the weapon. "Do your part. Let them get closer." At that moment, Lucas screamed. He had shoved aside the rug, torn open the trap door, and was trying to escape into the cellar. "Lucas!" I cried as he bolted from his corner. "Don't!" But he was already running. For a heartbeat, I saw pure desperation in his eyes as he sprinted toward the fireplace, trying to reach the small window beside it. Damien barked, "No!" But it was too late. Lucas kicked the gas tank as he leapt past it, knocking the valve open another notch. A sharp hiss filled the room, unmistakable, even in the chaos, the deadly whisper of escaping fuel. Three Balkan men forced part of the door open, guns jutting through. Damien fired repeatedly to hold them back, but the cabin had become a powder keg waiting for its spark. And that spark came when a bullet whistled across the room and struck the side of the fireplace, sending a spray of embers into the air. Everything happened in less than a single breath. I hurled the last bottle of alcohol toward the hearth. Damien twisted around me, dragging my head down against the floor, and Lucas, standing right beside the gas tank, stared in frozen horror. A burst of white light swallowed the cabin whole. The explosion roared like a mountain of snow collapsing. Heat surged outward so violently that the frost clinging to the roof evaporated instantly, turning into ghostly trails of mist in the winter night. The floor heaved upward, the walls splintered into fragments that flew into the storm. I was thrown into Damien, and Damien shielded me entirely with his body as debris rained down. The smell of smoke, burning wood, and scorched chemicals filled the air, a suffocating mixture that clawed into the lungs. When the roar faded into a distant hum, I lifted my head. Half the cabin was gone. Charred wooden planks fell like black snowflakes into the open air. Lucas was gone, no scream, no trace of a living body, only fragments scattered across the sooty ash-streaked snow. Damien stared at what remained of his younger brother, with no expression, but I saw the quiet shatter in the way his fist tightened the tendons, standing out stark and pale. Outside, the surviving Balkans staggered forward through the haze. Damien pulled me upright, his voice low, dark, forged in fire. "Move, we're not finished." I nodded and gripped his hand. Through the swirling storm made ghost-like by the heat of the blast, the two of us ran into the night, leaving behind nothing but a cabin reduced to cinders. The battle was far from over, but Damien and I, now undeniably on the same side, had stepped into the most dangerous part of the war. The fire from the cabin was still smoldering behind us when Damien pulled me toward the cellar hatch Lucas had opened moments before he died. We dove down just as the remaining Balkan men were beginning to recover from the explosion. The wooden floor crashed shut above us, snow and smoke swallowing the entrance, erasing every trace of our escape. Below was only a narrow tunnel so low and tight we had to bend almost double to move through it. Fallen tree roots formed the walls, cold, damp earth seeping through our clothes, and the roar of the storm above became a muted hum, leaving only the pounding of our hearts and Damien's rough, uneven breaths. When I glanced back, I felt a jolt of fear at the sight of blood soaking through the bandages at his shoulder, the dark red leaking across his coat, like misfortune reaching for more. "You're losing more blood than I thought," I whispered. But he didn't answer, only tightened his brow as though fighting off dizziness. He still tried to lead even as his steps began to drag. I slipped my arm beneath his bearing, the weight he was trying so hard to hide. "Let me help." "No." His voice was low but weaker than before. "Damien, if you fall now, I can't drag you another inch." He didn't argue again. His silence was the only permission he could manage. We walked for what felt like an eternity through that freezing tunnel before it finally opened to the far side of the forest, a hidden escape route the old Leone generation must have built to flee men like the Balkan. When the small wooden door gave way, a blast of snow stung our faces like a slap, but at least the gunfire was gone. The forest around us was dense, dark, and so quiet, the snow beneath our boots sounded deafening. Damien grew heavier with every step. I tightened my arm around him and pulled him deeper into the shadows. "Stay with me, Damien. We'll find shelter." The blizzard dimmed the sky until it felt like night. My eyes burned. The wind whipped my skin raw, and Damien's breathing turned hot and erratic, dangerously close to collapse. After maybe a few dozen more steps, a faint square silhouette appeared near the trees, an abandoned pickup truck half buried in snow. We nearly fell against it. I yanked the driver's door. After a hard pull, it groaned open with a dry metallic shriek. Inside was as cold as an icebox but shielded from the wind. I eased Damien into the passenger seat and shut the door. He leaned back, breath shallow, face drained to a sickly pale under the storm's blue-gray light. "Don't fall asleep," I tapped his cheek. "Damien, hear me. If you fall asleep, you won't wake up." His eyes opened with effort, defiance glimmering faintly. "I'm not sleeping." But his eyelids sagged as if each blink weighed as much as his body. I reached behind the seat, searching desperately for anything useful until my hand brushed a dusty CB radio on the old dashboard. The wires were intact, the knobs not entirely broken. I grabbed it. "Damien, does this still work?" It took him several seconds to focus on it. He shook his head faintly. "Signal's weak out here, but we can still reach someone if we use the emergency code." Damien frowned, his gaze hazy but sharp enough to show confusion. "What code?" "The ghost protocol. The one only triggered when the dawn is down and the family is blind." His eyes opened a little wider, fighting the heaviness of blood loss. "That's old family knowledge. Where did you learn that?" "I didn't just investigate the Balkans, Damien. I investigated you." I whispered, my voice steady despite the cold. 2 years ago, I decrypted a buried file from the Lyon archives, a contingency plan from your father's era. It listed a frequency and a rhythm reserved for the worst-case scenario. I memorized it. Damien looked at me, a flicker of something like awe passing through his pain. He had thought I was just a witness, stumbling into his war, but now he realized I had been studying his world long before I stepped into it. "If you're wrong," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "we call the wolves right to our door." "I'm not wrong." I twisted the radio dial, lowering the frequency to where the terrain interference was weakest. "I can mimic that signal." Damien tried to push himself upright, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Ava, if you send the wrong code, you'll call our enemies." "I know." I looked right at him. "But if I don't call the right person, you'll die before I get you 2 more steps." He stared at me for a long moment in that trembling darkness inside the truck, wind slamming the metal like a furious beast. And for the first time, he stripped away every guard he had. He placed his life entirely in my hands. I raised the microphone. "Do you trust me?" Damien gave the smallest nod, but I saw it. I tapped out the sequence, 3 long signals, one short, one vibrating pulse. I repeated it twice, then waited. Less than 10 seconds later, the radio crackled. A deep voice rumbled through low like distant thunder. "Who activated Lyon's highest security code?" I tightened my grip on the mic, the one holding the life of Damien Lyon. And for the first time since we met, Damien looked at me as if he were seeing sunrise in the dead of winter. When the transmission ended, the cabin sank into a silence so thick I could hear the snow hitting the roof like thousands of tiny grains of sand thrown against frozen metal. Damien's head rested back, each breath so heavy his chest trembled. I cupped his face gently. "Damien, look at me." His eyes fluttered open, slow and tired. I'm still here. I didn't believe it." I pressed my forehead to his, feeling the faint heat of his skin. "Don't sleep. Do you hear me?" Damien's lips twitched faint, but still touched with that familiar arrogance. "You giving me orders right now?" "Yes." I pressed his hand to my chest so he could feel my heartbeat, the warmest thing left in the storm. Snow hammered harder, blurring the windshield until it was nothing but white, and wind shook the truck like a beast trying to tear it apart. The radio stayed silent. No return message. No confirmation. A part of me began to question whether the code still meant anything, whether anyone who knew it was even alive. Damien's eyes closed for several seconds. A cold wave of panic sliced through me. Damien. I shook him. His eyes opened again barely. Ava, don't talk. Stay awake. If I don't survive. Damien, stop. You have to leave New York. Now. Never come back. I'm not going anywhere. Stubborn. Persistent. We stared at each other, suspended between life and death, with a world outside desperate to swallow us whole. Then the radio shrieked sharply, making me jump. A man's voice, deep and unmistakably tied to Damien's world, cut through the static. Repeat the signal. Who is with my boss? I grabbed the mic. Ava. I'm in the woodlands near the Hudson line, just north of the Bronx border. Damien is badly injured. A few seconds of silence. Then the voice returned lower, darker. Keep him awake. We'll be there in 5 minutes. The radio died. I barely had time to breathe when the ground trembled softly beneath the truck, as if something massive was rolling across the snow. Damien lifted his eyelids. Vincent. Vincent Moretti. Yes, my most loyal man. And the most dangerous. Damien managed a faint smile. You'll like him. I didn't like Mafia men, but if he brought reinforcements, I was willing to try. Yellow lights cut through the white wall of the storm. Then another. Then another. Then 5. Engines of armored vehicles roared like metal beasts tearing through the snow. The drifts exploded into clouds. A massive black armored truck skidded to a stop in front of us, headlights so bright I had to shield my face. The door swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a heavy tactical coat stepped out, his face carved with a thin scar from cheekbone to jaw. Vincent Moretti. I knew instantly. His eyes hit mine first, cold as a blade, then shifted to Damien, and the cold vanished, replaced by lethal focus. Vincent yanked open our door, nearly ripping it off. Boss. He reached in and lifted Damien with a strength both fierce and reverent. We lost all signal. The family's in chaos. Most of our men died at the meeting site. Don Roman ordered the entire force here. Damien tried to sit up but collapsed again. Take Ava. To the safe zone. Vincent glanced at me. Something in his expression changed. In that second, he understood I wasn't a hostage. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a passing lover. I was the person Damien had chosen to trust. Vincent dipped his head to me, a gesture no Mafia soldier gave, unless to someone with extraordinary status. You are the reason he's alive. I didn't waver. If needed, I'll be the reason he stays alive. Vincent nodded slowly, respectfully, like a warrior acknowledging an equal. He barked orders. Take her to the lead vehicle. Clear the route back to the city. I'll bring the boss to the medical truck myself. I held Damien's hand before they took him from me. He gripped weakly. Ava, I'm here. Don't disappear. I'll stay with you. His fingers slipped from mine, only because he no longer had the strength. Vincent signaled me forward. I climbed into the armored truck. As it moved, I looked through the reinforced glass and saw Vincent carrying Damien in his arms like a wounded king surrounded by an army carving its path through the blizzard. And for the first time since I met Damien, I didn't see a ruthless boss. I saw a man fighting for his life, and somehow I had become the place he moved toward, rather than the danger he fled. New York was a steel-gray blur when the Leone convoy returned. Snow still blanketed the streets the city held in a stunned, frozen silence. But inside the Leone headquarters, the air simmered with a heat that felt like fire smoldering under ice. Damien was rushed into his private medical suite, where the family doctors stitched his wounds and pushed fluids into him. I stood in the hallway as Vincent barked orders for total silence. He didn't want a single whisper leaking before Damien gave direction. Meanwhile, I was escorted to the largest conference room on the 7th floor. Before me stretched a long walnut table over 20 feet, circled by capos, advisors, and high-ranking soldiers of the Leone family, every one of them staring at me as though I were an outsider who had stumbled blindly into the darkest corner of the city. I set my folder on the table and opened it. Encrypted messages, transaction photos, times, locations, clear links between Lucas and the Balkan. Faces shifted across the room. Rage, shock, grief, dread. An older capo slammed his fist onto the table. "You're telling us. Lucas betrayed Damien. Betrayed all of us, I'm not telling you. The evidence is." I slid the decoded page toward him. Lucas took $250,000 in exchange for route details, meeting schedules, and Damien's location the night before the ambush. What happened at the warehouse wasn't chance. Lucas orchestrated it. Silence fell like a blade. A shadow stretched across the doorway. Damien stood there, his shoulders still wrapped in white, his frame lean from blood loss, but his gaze sharp enough to make half the room step back instinctively. He walked straight to the table without help. Vincent shadowed him close, but not touching the quiet posture of a guardian. Damien didn't look at anyone but the documents. He flipped through each page, each image, each code. At the end, he placed his hand on the table. Not hard, but the entire room felt it. Lucas was my blood. His voice was low, cracked, but unwavering. But he chose to betray me. Betray this family and betray everyone who died that night. No one dared lift their head. Damien turned his eyes to me. Not gratitude, not anger, but a clear acknowledgement that everything I brought was the truth. Ava will continue analyzing intelligence. Anything related to the Balkan goes to her first. A capo protested immediately. "Boss, she's an outsider. She isn't family. She isn't." Vincent stepped forward, voice slicing like a blade. "Who saved the boss in the storm? Who cracked codes our intelligence team couldn't touch? Who kept him alive long enough to return?" No one answered. Damien braced both hands on the table and lowered his head slightly, his voice rising like something ancient from deep water. "From this moment, Ava is head of strategic analysis. All data passes through her. Anyone who disagrees can walk out that door and never come back." The silence felt like a funeral for those still loyal to Lucas. One by one, the capos bowed their heads to me, a woman they never imagined would stand in this place. I felt Damien's gaze on me as I gathered my documents. Not the cautious look from when we first met. Not suspicion. Not pure trust either. Something more dangerous, respect. When the meeting ended and I stepped into the hallway, Damien spoke. "Ava." I turned. He leaned against the wall, exhausted but still carrying that sharp, dissecting presence. "You did better than anyone I've ever had on my team. I only did what needed to be done." "No." He stepped closer until only inches separated us. "You did what no one else could." I felt his warmth despite the cold hallway air. Damien lowered his voice, his breath touching my ear like a confession. "Respect is the most dangerous currency in my world. It makes people forget where the line is." My throat tightened. "So you're warning me? Or yourself?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me everything. The path between us had shifted, no longer just survival, something deeper, sharper, and capable of destroying us both if we misstepped. From the day Damien announced my new role, the entire Leone family moved like a single body, learning to adapt to a new heart. I didn't just analyze data, I directed it. Every morning I worked in the strategy room on the 8th floor, seated before 3 large screens filled with city maps, encrypted intel streams, and financial trails tied to the Balkan. The capos were skeptical at first, but within a week their attitudes shifted completely, because I didn't just read data, I read them. One capo had tried to hide a secondary route that the Balkan had infiltrated. I placed the file on the table, looked straight into his eyes, and spoke in a tone as calm as talking about the weather. "You're hiding another route from me. When I find it, what exactly do you plan to tell Damien?" His face drained of color instantly. After that day, no one dared hide anything from me. Another capo grew irritated when I suggested a full overhaul of their communication network. "We've used this structure for 20 years. And the Balkan know every hole in it. The people who died last week are proof. I didn't raise my voice yet. The whole room fell silent, as if sealed in stone. Damien stood in the corner, arms crossed, not intervening, but his eyes stayed on me, not just watching what I did, but watching the way I became something his family needed and had never possessed before. A mind unafraid of blood, unafraid of the dark, unafraid of the truth. By evening, I was summoned to the rooftop. Vincent said Damien wanted to see me. I pushed open the door, and December's cold wind struck my face. The snow had stopped, but the sky still held that post-storm charcoal color. Damien stood by the railing, hands in the pockets of his long coat, his face lit faintly by the golden reflection from the tower opposite. He turned when he heard my steps. "You're doing very well." His voice was low without politeness or flattery. "They listen to you. Because they're afraid Damien Leone will personally handle them if they don't. No, because they're afraid of how clearly you see through them." I paused. When he said it, his eyes weren't sharp like in the conference room. They were slower, deeper, like he had been studying me far longer than I realized. "You read people the way others read code. Calm, precise." He leaned back against the railing. The night wind swept his black hair aside, revealing the stitched scar along his temple, the wound shifting color under the light. "In this family, I can only trust the ones who don't fear the truth. And you live by it." I stood only 2 steps away. From here, the city stretched below like an ocean of lights, and he and I felt like two people stranded above the world, caught on a high floor where only the cold sky existed. "You called me up here to say that." Damien looked at me for a long moment, as if choosing from 100 answers. "No. I called you because you've worked for 20 straight hours. I needed to know you're still breathing." A soft laugh escaped me. "I'm fine. Fine enough that it worries me." He said it without looking away, without hiding it, without guarding himself. And that was what made my heart pause. A stretch of quiet fell between us longer than normal. I looked away to the city, but Damien stepped closer. "Ava." His breath touched the edge of my ear, blending with the night wind. "You understand, I don't trust easily. I don't let people close. I don't let anyone cross the line." I swallowed, and I crossed it. "You didn't cross it." He answered at once. "You broke it." I turned back to him, my eyes meeting his dark, deep-edged with the caution of a man who had lived in shadows his whole life, yet now saw something that pulled him forward even as it warned him to step back. "What if I don't want to step out of that line?" I asked softly but steadily. Damien looked at me like it was the most dangerous question anyone had ever asked him, but instead of retreating, he moved another half-step closer, leaving only breath between us. "Then you must understand." He spoke slowly, each word falling like thunder onto snow. "Once you stand next to me, you don't just share power." He lowered his head, his voice dropping to a register that tightened my chest. "You share my enemies." I didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I know." A strange silence wrapped around us, then not the silence of a storm, but the silence of two people who understood that one more step would change everything forever. Damien lifted his hand as if to touch me, but stopped in mid-air, respecting a boundary even he wasn't ready to shatter. "Tonight," he murmured, "let me watch you a while longer." I didn't ask why. I just stood beside him, looking out at a city still bitten by the storm, understanding that my new power in the Leone family wasn't only the seat I held at the table, it was the place beside the most dangerous man in the city, in a way no one else had. Near midnight, just as I finished the final report on the Balkans' underground finances, Damien appeared at the doorway of the strategy room. No knock, no warning. He simply stood there, his tall frame cutting through the blue light of the screens, his dark eyes holding a decision I couldn't yet read. "Come with me," he said. No explanation, no pause. I rose instinctively, sensing something different in his voice, not cold, not commanding, but not gentle either. Something in between and far more dangerous. He led me into the private elevator and pressed the lowest level one. Only he and 3 closest capos were allowed to enter. When the doors opened, cold air and the scent of machine oil hit my face. The underground garage, where everything began. Damien walked ahead, his footsteps echoing across the polished concrete. I followed, my breath slowing. Anyone who had survived the life I'd lived knew one truth: powerful men didn't bring you to an underground garage at midnight without a reason. Damien, I whispered. What is this about? There is something. He didn't turn back, just walked deeper past neat rows of armored vehicles. Finally, he stopped before an empty space where the SUV I had broken into during the blizzard once sat. It was back now, and it was stunning. The black Cadillac Escalade stood like a resurrected beast. Matte black armor, fresh tires, triple-layer bulletproof windows, LED headlights sharp as Damien's own gaze. No longer the freezing snow-soaked, desperate place where I had clung to life. Now it looked like a war machine, a moving fortress. Damien looked at me. Recognize it. A chill slid down my spine. That's your car, and the place you almost died. I swallowed hard. It wasn't something I wanted to revisit, but it was where everything began. Why bring me here? He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the back door, the exact spot I had crawled into, trembling, breathless, nearly giving up. He opened it. Inside, everything had been rebuilt: black Italian leather seats, ebony wood trim, the faint smell of warm metal and new upholstery. But on the floor, right where I had curled up to survive, lay a black fur mat, soft, thick, luxurious, wildly out of place in an armored truck. I stared. This? It's so you remember you lived. I couldn't speak for several seconds. He reached into his coat pocket. And this? When he extended his hand, the object glinting under the harsh neon lights made my breath catch. It was a shim, the exact shape of the tool I'd used to break into his life. But this wasn't rusted steel. It was solid, heavy platinum, engraved with 2 letters, A.C. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, and looked at him with a frown. Damien, this is platinum. It is. Platinum is too soft, I said, my practical instincts kicking in even now. If I tried to shim a lock with this, it would snap inside the mechanism. It's useless as a tool. A faint, rare smile touched the corner of Damien's lips, a look of genuine respect. Exactly. He stepped closer, closing my fingers around the cold metal. It's not meant to open doors, Ava. It's a trophy. A reminder that the skills you use to survive on the street are the reason you're standing here alive. He paused, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. But you don't need a tool to break in anymore. With his other hand, he pulled out a set of electronic keys, the real keys to the armored fortress behind us, and pressed them into my palm alongside the platinum shim. You don't break in, he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with terrifying intensity. You own the keys, you walk through the front door, or you don't walk in at all. His voice dropped to its lowest register, danger and tenderness woven into one. Because you have me. My chest tightened. Damien. He shook his head slightly, stopping my instinct to retreat. I didn't bring you here to thank you. I don't owe you a debt. You saved me, I saved you. We are even. He leaned in, his gaze cutting straight through me. I brought you here to tell you one thing. A cold breeze swept across the garage floor, but my skin prickled from something far deeper. Damien spoke slowly, every word deliberate. From this moment on, you don't run alone. The platinum shim between our hands felt like an unspoken vow. If you run, he continued, voice dark as tempered steel, then I will be the one running after you. I inhaled sharply, but my breath trembled. And if I don't run anymore? Damien lowered his head, his breath warm against my cheek, so close the entire garage seemed to freeze around us. "Then you stay beside me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. And for the first time, I didn't want to resist. I didn't want to run. My hand closed around the platinum shim cold at first, until Damien's hand covered mine, warming it in a way no blizzard ever could. He looked at me one last time, his dark eyes sealing an invisible pact. "Ava Carter," he whispered, voice low and absolute. "From tonight on, you belong to my team." And deep in my bones, I knew this night had changed everything. A thin veil of snow covered the New York sky, drifting down like winter's final breath, as Damien led me to the rooftop of the Lyon building, where the cold wind scraped across my skin, like a reminder that the place that once tried to swallow me whole had now become the place that would define my future. He stood facing me, his dark eyes deeper than the night itself, carrying neither the softness of a fairy tale nor the trembling sweetness of a romantic proposal. Damien was not the kind of man who would kneel in the snow and plead for my agreement. He was the kind who built an empire with blood, guarded it with steel, and offered promises through power. So when he opened the black velvet box and revealed not a glittering diamond ring, but a heavy platinum band engraved with the Lyon family crest, I was not surprised. This was not jewelry. This was a crown for the woman he chose to stand beside his throne. Damien stepped closer, his voice low and steady as a lock clicking shut. "Ava Carter," he said, "not to be a wife in the ordinary sense, not to stand behind me, but to stand next to me." I looked down at the ring in my hand. It was cold, sharp, beautiful, in a way that demanded respect rather than comfort. I drew in a long breath. "Damien, you know I don't belong to anyone," I said. "If you choose me, you choose every shadow in me, every part of me that survived by doing whatever it took. And if one day you betray me, I will bring down the Lyon Empire with these very hands." The wind seemed to hold still for a heartbeat, as if the entire city were listening. Then Damien let out a quiet laugh, his eyes lighting with something fierce, as if he had just heard the most beautiful vow of his life. "That is exactly why I choose you, Ava," he said. "I don't need someone obedient. I need a queen strong enough to keep this empire standing if I fall." He took my hand, not hurried, but firm enough that I could feel the truth of him placing his future in my grasp. The ring slid onto my finger, icy at first, then warming quickly, as if melting into my skin. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the girl who once trembled in his car during a blizzard. I was standing in the heart of power, in falling snow, in the reflection of a city's lights shining in the eyes of a man who once made all of New York bow. And I felt no fear. Damien lifted my chin gently, his gaze locking onto mine as if he wanted to burn this moment into memory. "From now on, you are mine, and I am yours, not to possess, but to rule together." Snow drifted softly around us like silver threads scattering across the rooftop. This had once been the place death waited for me, the place where the world had turned its back on me. Now it was the place where I was given power recognition, a place at the side of the most dangerous man in the city. A long journey from a freezing homeless girl to the woman wearing the ring of an empire. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. That sometimes in the darkest moments, when all we can see is the storm and our own fear, fate is quietly opening a door we never expected. Strength does not come from where we begin, but from how we rise when there is nothing left to hold. Thank you for staying until the end of this emotional story. What part of Ava and Damien's journey resonates with you? Have you ever had a moment when despair suddenly led to a future you never imagined? I would truly love to hear your honest thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy deep emotional and surprising stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share it to spread something meaningful each day. Wishing you health, peace, and joy always. Thank you, and see you in the next video.